Welcome to the WellCast. Life is messy. We're here to help you sort it out.
Welcome back to another episode of the WellCast. We are happy that you guys have joined us again.
As always, we're always thrilled.
We're always thrilled. I'm here with Mike Sarasoni. How the heck are you, man?
I'm good, Jordan. It's good to be back on another episode. This was a really good episode.
Honestly, it feels kind of like a different one than we've ever done before.
Yeah, it's really story-based.
Yeah.
By the way, if you're enjoying the WellCast, we want to take this time to ask you... Subscribe.
What are you doing?
Follow, share on social media.
Yeah, send it to your friends.
If you're enjoying it and you're not sharing it, you're robbing people of the joy of sharing in your joy.
We feel very strong about this. Yeah.
So...
yeah. We just messing around, listening, or watching this thing, share it.
Pay it forward.
Love it. Yeah, please.
Perfect.
Right. Well, today we're talking with Pastor Joe Buitrago.
Yes, you nailed it.
And the man has a story.
He does.
And it was honestly really powerful, and you'll hear it. We don't need to tell it for him.
Yeah. I think everybody's story puts God's sovereignty on display, and some just do it in a really compelling way. And I think Joe's story is one of those stories. It's just so compelling. This guy from Nicaragua, who was a baby in Nicaragua. Now he's a pastor here in Fresno. Yeah. That's
a really funny to me way to put it, but it's true.
He was.
I don't know why.
He was a baby.
He was a baby. Yeah.
In Nicaragua. But it's just amazing to see God at work in his life.
Yeah. Revelation 12:11 says that we are saved against the devices of Satan by the blood of the Lamb and the word of his testimony.
Yeah, that's a good flex right there.
And so, obviously the blood of the Lamb being the gospel and the explicit gospel of what Jesus did on the cross, but the word of his testimony in our lives. I mean, you hear something like Joe's story.
It's kind of like a Moses story, right?
Brought out of, I'd say he was in a significantly oppressive environment in Nicaragua, and his family, the endurance, the protection that God had over them, the sovereignty of God over his life, to be in Fresno, California, like you said, no longer a baby.
Not a baby anymore. Yeah.
And pastoring a Spanish-speaking community here, and we're just so thankful for him in our church. For the amount of people who his lives have touched, and he's formed so much of our worldviews on just what it means to be an immigrant and things like that. It's so cool,
Yeah. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode with Joe Buitrago.
Close.
I
love it.
Did I nail it?
Very close, yeah.
All right, well, let's jump into the episode with Joe, talking about his life and what God's done.
Well, we are joined here by Joe B. How you doing, man?
Fine. About you?
Joby?
Help me. Joby?
Is his name Joby?
Help me understand how to pronounce your last name. I got so self-conscious when I was about to pronounce it. I always want to say Buitrago. Is that right?
Well,
because there's an I snuck in there, right?
But the T kind of sounds like a D. It's Buitrago.
Well, you guys are both sounding
We suck.
the wrong way, but it's okay.
Please teach us.
Yes, the right pronunciation is Buitrago.
Buitrago.
I knew the I would have something.
The I in there.
I don't think
Buitrago.
Yeah. Everyone who's listening, they're like, no, you didn't. You said it wrong. Actually, you didn't even say it.
I know. I kept it out because I said got self-conscious, but I'm asking you. Thank you for teaching me.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Joe, we are here joined by you today because honestly, we love you. We care about you, but you also have a really cool story. And, you are an immigrant, correct?
Correct.
Where did you immigrate from?
I'm from the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, Haiti being number one, and my beautiful country of Nicaragua, it's number two. So poorest country in Central America.
Wow. And when did you come? Let's just get right into it.
Let's wind it back.
Sure.
Right, baby Joe in a bassinet.
Tell
us
paint
about
the picture.
What was your life like in Nicaragua?
Sure. So I grew up in Managua, Nicaragua. Managua was the capital. Was born in 1977 to a family that was crazy. Nicaragua is a very, at that time, it was a country that was in transition from a dictatorship to a communist takeover of the country.
So not much of a
not much of a
great exchange
right?
there. Yeah.
Yeah. So growing up in Nicaragua, I had a couple of things against me. I always tell people growing up, one of it was extreme poverty, as Nicaragua has always been really, really poor.
Well, tell us about that. Let's stop for a second. When we think of poverty here in America, we don't have I would guess we don't have the same understanding of poverty as what you experienced in your family in Nicaragua. Tell us a little bit about that.
Correct. And it's funny you ask, because I was thinking about that today. I was like, being poor in America is not the same as being poor in Nicaragua, in a third world country, right? When I talk about poverty, it's thinking about where your next meal is going to come from, not having the things that we have here, as far as housing, and you see people living in cardboard boxes, or living in the street, or living without the necessities of rice, beans, oil, toilet paper,
things that most people here in America would take for
granted, right? So the luxury of being able to go to a doctor, or being able to go to the movies, or be able to just do those little things, right? Like most of the people growing up in Nicaragua, most of the people walked everywhere. Or take the bus or taxi, having a luxury of having a car, stuff like that. So that's when I tell people that we are blessed in this country, the things that we have. Poverty looks different here than in a third world country.
Well, paint for us a picture of your situation. I mean, what did your childhood look like?
Sure. So my mom and dad, they were married, but my dad was a guy that was not around too much. He had other women. He was married only to my mom, but he had other women. And growing up in a very Catholic, they didn't go to church that much.
Like kind of nominally Christian.
Yeah, just like very.
There's like a large culture of Catholicism there.
Yeah, now things have changed, but back in the days, there was.
I'm sure communism wasn't very kind to that.
Yes, it wasn't. And my grandmother had a lot of saints in her house, and she believed in a lot of the saints, and put candles and stuff like that to it. But anyhow, my dad was an alcoholic. He drank a lot, and he had a lot of money, and he had a shop where they fix cars and stuff like that. But he was never home, so I never grew up seeing a traditional family like mom and dad together eating dinner. That was not normal. My uncles were heavy drinkers and using drugs. My uncle sold marijuana, and that's how he made a living. So I saw that growing up, all right. And so that those things that I mentioned that I had against me growing up, it's just the reality is that poverty was one of them. But there was also another thing called a little civil war that started back in the 80s, as far as Nicaragua in the Sandinista government, which was the communist government that was uprising in those times. You'll if you know a little bit about the history, you'll know that Fidel Castro was part of that, and and the Soviet Union back in those days, they were heavily infiltrating weapons to Nicaragua to fight the United States got involved. It was during the Cold War, and the United States decided that they were going to send weapons to some rebels that started uprising against the Sandinista government. And they did this, they were called the Contras, and they were trained by the CIA. And so, you have poverty, you have war, you always had this tension in school, whether are we going to get invaded by the United States, or is the Contras going to come and they're going to, the Sandinista government will sell you this, that the evil empire is the United States, and you can't trust the United States. You got to be a communist. You got to defend your country. And there started to be a shortage of food. I mean, there was already poverty, and there was even more shortage of food because the fact that, the communists, they control the economy. There was only 2 channels, 2 newspapers. Just propaganda everywhere of Cuba, the evil empire, the Yankees, the Sandinistas were the heroes of the story in that.
Wow.
In that. So growing up, I heard that every day, right? Even going to school, I remember singing, them teaching me songs that were saying that the United States was the evil empire, that we are to defend our nation, even if we have to die. And that's important because as my story gets, as I tell you my story, why that is important, because they were really selling this to the people, that if you are a communist, you will go and defend your country against the Contras, and the United States, because they knew the United States was sending weapons there and money and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was when you were growing up, school age and younger, were child soldiers a thing? Like, did you know people who were kids that maybe were in your neighborhood that had been taken and put into the war?
Yeah. Let me come back a little bit to that.
Yeah.
As like I said, as that's going around in my world, there's also a God working in that aspect, because not seeing my dad around, not seeing, and then hearing all the things about war and just a dysfunctional family, uncles, aunts, and all that stuff. God started to work in my heart, in my life. I always tell people I'm a miracle from God, because I should have been dead when I was in Nicaragua because of the war and because of the poverty and because all the things that happened. But here's the interesting thing, that in the midst of all that, I get invited to go to church by my mom's friend that cuts her hair. My mom doesn't even go to church. She's like, okay, you can take him. It was like an Easter service, I remember. And then here I am, 7 years old. God is implementing a miracle in my life, where at 7 years old, I recognized that I was a sinner. I recognized that He had a plan for my life. It's like something I cannot explain. Like, He chose me out of the depths of poverty. And I still get choked up just to think how good God has been to me. So at 7 years old, I get the opportunity to open my heart to Jesus. And then on Mother's Day, I invited my mom to go to church, because I started going to church on Sundays. I loved it. And said, Mom, I'm going to sing. Come. She came. And the gospel came to my mother. So this was around 1984, 85, around there. I was around probably like 7 years old, around there. And so that was the beginning of the gospel coming into my family. In 1984, 85, my mom decided to leave my dad. He just said, I had enough, man. You had so many women, so many alcohol issues with you, that I'm leaving. Plus, there's an economical situation in Nicaragua. We're struggling just to give by, right? Food and rations and stuff like that. My mom decides to come to California. I don't know how she did it. And I was a kid, but she ends up in California. And and here's where, to answer your question, this is where the things in Nicaragua get real serious, because from 1984 to about 86, the United States sends the money and all that stuff. There's real heavy war in the jungles of Nicaragua. And the Sandinista government decides that, we're going to start enlisting the young boys and the young kids to go fight.
When you say young, what ages are we talking?
We're talking about, if you can hold that M16, if you're like 10, 11 years old and you're able to hold that M16 and you look big enough to be a soldier, you're going to war, right? So they started picking up kids from the street, and all of a sudden just disappear. I remember my cousin being one of those that disappeared. And they know that they were going to go fight over there in the jungles. And literally the history pages of the Nicaraguan, you can see of trucks and body bags, trucks being filled with body bags of young boys that died in the war.
Did you ever see your cousin again?
Yeah, he actually escaped. He escaped the jungles. He had a very, very interesting story how he did that, and ended up back in Managua, in the city. And God put His hand on him, and he was able to escape. Wow. And but those are very common stories that you hear through Nicaragua. That, and mothers that lost their sons and never heard of them. What happened to them? Like they died in the war because they were being forced to go into war. That they didn't have any say or nothing. They're just like, okay, you're big enough to hold an M16. You're a communist, and you're gonna go defend against this evil empire that is the United States.
Wow. So fast forward a little bit, right? So things are getting really rough in Nicaragua. Your mom musters up the courage to leave your dad, after all of the things that he's put your family through. What does that journey look like? Does your mom come ahead of you? Does she bring you with her? What is that journey for you specifically to the United States? What does that look like?
Correct. My mom, like I said, my mom came first. She worked for about 2 years.
How old were you when your mom left?
I was around 7 years old when my mom left, and
So-
that was a dramatic thing, man.
Yeah. Had she already left your dad at that point?
Yeah. She
So
had left.
who were you living with?
I was living with my grandma,
Okay.
and I hardly got to see my dad.
Yeah.
There were times where my dad would tell me he's gonna pick me up, and I would just fall asleep waiting for him on the steps of my grandmother's house. He never showed up.
Wow.
Yeah. So 2 years, my mom working and sending money to us, and not only that, just being pretty much just with my grandmother and grateful for the people that God had put around the church and the gospel that was already in my heart. But in 1986, my mom came back, and she's like, you know what? He goes, we're leaving. You're a big boy,
So you were 9?
Yeah, I was around 9. He goes, you're a big boy. They're gonna get you. He goes,
Yeah.
they already got your cousin, so you're going. So we're going. So she had made some arrangements where somebody was going to meet us in Mexico and stuff like that. But I remember what I can remember was that we left at night, and we ended up in Honduras, which is a neighbor nation right next to Nicaragua. We walked. We took a bus. We took. In the back of a 18-wheeler, whatever it took, from Honduras to Guatemala. My mom has some connections there. I don't know exactly the details, but I do know that, it was like a week journey walking with the people. It was just my mom, myself, and my sister. I have one sister.
Okay.
And there are other people that came, but it was a very, very dangerous journey, for a single mom to walk with her 9-year-old son.
You walked for a week?
We walked, and we took buses. We took whatever we can get ourselves into to try to leave the country.
Wow.
And you just do what you got to do to survive, right? And eventually we ended up in Tijuana, Mexico, and my mom had some connections there with what they call the coyotes, which are the people that crossed the border at that time. And I remember literally crossing the border, underneath the fence, and someone picked us up on the other side, and my mom had some connections, and we ended up in the beautiful city of San Francisco. That's my journey. In 1986, we ended up in San Francisco. My mom had some connections, some friends. We didn't know anybody, but God had a plan, right? God had already put the gospel in my heart and the heart of my mom. And as we get there in 1986, God is about to do something even greater in my life. So, yeah.
Wow. I mean, your mom, obviously extremely brave and industrious woman, like strong, resourceful. That's pretty incredible. And, obviously not an ideal way to enter the country, but coming out of desperation, it sounded like you guys had very little choices in life.
Correct. I always tell people my hero in life is not the baseball players or the sports figures. My hero is my mom. Strong woman.
So you ended up in San Francisco, and you were 9 years old. Tell me, did you speak any English?
No English, no culture, and here's a funny thing, growing up in this system of communism and not having the liberty that you have here in America, or the food that you have here in America. One of the first things when I got here in 1986, how God connected my mom to this lady that needed to be, that couldn't pay my mom. The only thing she could offer was a room. A room to she could sleep, and as my mom took care of her, she was in dialysis. And so we stood in that room with my mom and my sister but here's God again intervening, and how Ephesians says, "But God," right?
Yeah.
So God has this tremendous. Her brother shows up, and her brother's single, and her brother looks at my mom. It's like, "Oh man, this beautiful Latina." So I gotta connect with her, right? And in about a year, he ends up being her husband, They get married.
Your stepdad?
Yeah, my stepdad. He ends up being a big impact in my life. Raises us, gives me the gift of citizenship. I'm like, I became a United States citizen because of that partnership, right? That my mom and my stepdad got married, and he's able to fix my immigration status, which was a dream come true.
Yeah.
But coming, as you mentioned, but going back to that culture, it's like one of the things that I always remember is coming in and going to a supermarket and seeing all this food. Man.
Wow. Yeah.
I remember.
Sure, it'd be a trip.
It was like overwhelming. Like,
yeah.
You mean I can have this? And just to think about that, one of the first things I wanted to try was an apple.
Huh.
People ask me.
You had never had an apple?
I have never had an apple. Never had an apple. Never had grapes. All that stuff was in the United States. I put an embargo against Nicaragua, so all those things needed to be brought in, and certain things only the rich people could afford.
Mm-hmm.
So I never had pizza. I never had a hamburger. Never had hot dogs. Never knew what it was to go into like a donut shop. I remember going into a donut shop and seeing all the donuts, and my stepdad telling me, "You can have them if you want. Which one do you want?"
What's your favorite donut now that you've been able to enjoy
the chocolate glaze ones?
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, that's gotta be.
I mean, you can be wrong, but I mean, maple bars are the best. It's okay.
It's so funny.
Different culture. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's so funny because as they tell me, as I started attending public school, right, in San Francisco, and they're like, "You're gonna get free food." Like, free food? What? And then all the kids, they hated the food, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you don't want. I didn't understand English that well, but whatever I could understood, it's like, give me the food and I'll eat it if you don't want it, right? Because I came from that mentality that you don't throw things away,
right?
Because
you have
to say whatever you had.
Yeah.
So you know how people complain about school lunch sucks. I was like, no, man. Compared to my people from my country, your food is delicious. So,
you were eating beans and rice, and they got free pizza every day, and you're like, what?
Is that where you? Because I know your story a little bit. Is that where you have kind of developed a love for cooking and food? Did it come out of that, like that realization that this is an amazing blessing?
Yes, I think so. And also my grandmother was an excellent cook, and my mom. So I think that comes in already in our genes. But yeah, the appreciation of food and knowing that food brings it's that bridge that connects culture, connects people, and So that's one of the reasons why I love food.
Well, talk to me about so you come here, you don't speak English, you're learning English, you're learning the new culture, all these things, but you also have a faith. And what's God doing in you? What are your connections with the church in America? How have you bridged that gap?
Correct. God, like I said, God has always had his hand on me and positioned me in the right places, even meeting my stepdad. And he moved us to the East Bay, across the bay. And when we moved to the East Bay...
Where'd you guys move?
The East Bay, just a little town called Hayward.
Yeah, Haystack.
Yeah, Hayward. We moved to Hayward.
I had family there.
Okay. Yeah, so
the Stack.
That's right. You know it.
Castro Valley.
Yeah. So God is just so good, because the apartment building where we moved in, there was a new church that had moved into that neighborhood, and they came knocking at our door and inviting the kids to Vacation Bible School. At that time, I was around 10 years old already. And they're like, you want to come? Are your parents here? No, they're working. But the guy left his number, and I guess somehow my parents were okay for me to go. And
different times,
go. Those are the times, right? Like, you can go. And I ended up going to a Baptist church, and ended up that week getting baptized.
Was it an English-speaking church?
English-speaking church. At 10 years old, I gave my life. The pastor said, "Who wants to get baptized?" You go, "Come on down." And something in my heart said, I got to get baptized at 10 years old, and I got baptized, and then they were able to. That church was able to connect us to a Spanish-speaking church, a Baptist church, Southern Baptist church, and that's where my journey of growing in the faith came through being connected to a Southern Baptist Spanish-speaking church.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
I love the thought that pops into my head when you're sharing of, like, I wonder if those people who knocked on your door have any idea of the legacy that God used in, from there planting the seed of inviting you to come to a VBS, to all the ministry that you've been blessed to be a part of, both here in Fresno and in the Bay Area. It's just, for our listeners, it's just a good reminder that we have no clue how God's going to use our faithfulness. And, if we just listen to what he puts on our hearts, he can do incredible things. I mean, think of the many people who have been impacted by your ministry, and it all kind of started with that first invite. I love that thought.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, I mean, walk us through your teens now. Like, you grew up there. I don't know. Did you feel any sort of calling into ministry in any way? Yeah,
I didn't. As I was growing up, my parents were in and out of church, mostly my stepdad, but my mom was pretty faithful. And growing up as a teenager in the Bay Area, in a very liberal part of our country, all right, and culturally diverse, right? I grew up in a very diverse, Hayward's very diverse. So growing up, I always felt that God has saved me for something. There was just something in me as I was growing up as a teenager that I knew I wanted to be two things. Or I wanted to be a police officer, or I wanted to be a pastor. But for some reason,
gotta start with a P.
Yeah, one of those two things, right? And I was like, I knew that I wanted to follow one of those two callings in my life. And God just doesn't save you from something just to save you, but He has a purpose. When I was like 12 years old, I had this opportunity. I had this life-changing perspective in life. Besides my journey here, I went into a swimming pool, and I don't know how to swim. All right, and all I remember is going into the 8 feet and hitting the bottom, and this guy jumping in, and the only thing I remember is water coming out of. He did a CPR on me, and water came out of, and I just remember this guy next. I never met this guy. I don't know who he was, but he saved me. And in that moment, I said, God, if you saved me from the second time, you saved me because you saved me from communism and from poverty, and now you're saving me from almost dying in the swimming pool. And to this day, I don't like swimming pools. I don't swim. But anyhow, I think that was one of the things that said, God, you saved me my life. Now, the second time, I'm going to use my life to honor you. So I started serving in my church, in the youth ministry, and I finally said, you know what, this is something that I think I want to do. I started when I graduated from high school. I started attending City College, Chabot City College, and there in Hayward, and I was going for administration of justice. I thought that's what I want to be. But I remember when I was like 19 or 20 years old, I had met my wife, Rebecca, and we went to a retreat. We went to what do they call them? The young adult retreats Southern Baptist put on at this camp called Janus Park at that time.
Yeah, Janus Park. Yeah. I grew up going there.
Yeah. So
Southern Baptist Unite.
Yes, and I remember the speaker was at that time, the director of the convention was Fermin Whitaker, Carlos Whitaker's dad.
Oh, really?
Carlos Whitaker's dad, and I remember him preaching about Isaiah, that God called Isaiah, and he goes, someone in this room, God is calling. There's some people here, some Isaiahs in this room. God is calling to be pastor, and God has saved you from some stuff in your life. He has made miracles out of your life. You should have been dead, but God saved you from something. And I felt like God was using Fermin Whitaker to specifically speak to my life, and I felt like it was just me and God, rather, me and Fermin Whitaker. Like God was just pointing at me, and He said, well, if you want to do that, if you think God's calling you to be a pastor, you come to the altar right now. So I remember coming to the altar and giving my life totally to the Lord and say, from this moment on, I'm going to serve you whether I get paid or not in ministry. And that was in 1999.
Wow.
So after this conference, you make the decision, I'm going to become a pastor. What next? What's the next step for you? What doors did God open?
Yeah.
What doors did he close?
Yeah, I get married in 1999, and then right after that, I get my first job in ministry, which is a youth pastor. So I feel your pain.
Hey, yeah.
I feel your
Big
pain
ups,
and
yeah.
your joy, right? Yeah. So I worked in this church, in this small unit church in Union City, Southern Baptist Church, and God starts working in my heart, connects me with a good pastor that's my mentor there, and God just starts moving doors, opening doors, closing doors. We have children, my wife and I, and How
many children?
We have 4 at that time.
Yeah, just in general.
Oh, just 4 children,
Okay.
3 adult children, and 1 still a teenager.
Okay.
So, I think the youth ministry develop character, develop the love for people and the love for discipleship. As I got older, and God took me to Southern California, to Palm Springs. I lived in Palm Springs for a while.
Southern California
Yeah.
is the best part of, like, Fresno South is the best part of California, in my opinion.
He almost dug his own grave
Yeah.
in the
If you say
town he
so.
lives in.
No,
He's
I
like, wait,
love Fresno,
let's
Clovis.
just gerrymander Fresno into
Nah,
it.
I love Central Valley down south.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
Middle down.
But fast forwarding a little bit, just to I was 26 years old, living in Palm Springs. I get a phone call one day from this missionary that I know, that I had some connections with, and he goes, "Hey Joe, God has been putting in my heart your name, and I want you to come to Sacramento, and I want you to, what do you think about taking over a church?"
Oh, wow.
Yeah. A church that's dying and is in need of a young man like you. And I was like, man, I had a good job working for the city of Palm Springs, running their Meals on Wheels program, and all that stuff. It's like, no, I don't know if the God, but God started working in my heart, and eventually I accepted that calling. And I was 26 years old. I moved my family from Palm Springs, California, to Sacramento, and to a city called West Sacramento, and we took over a church that was dying, mostly elderly people, and it was we spent about 3 years in that church, and God grew us a lot, and a lot of tension, a lot of growth, a lot of patience. But God was working in this young pastor's life, to love people, to love His word, and to be faithful where God had to put me at that time. So, yeah.
So I think God uses our experiences to prepare us for the next thing that He's calling us to. It's like in the story of Joseph's life, right? Every single part of his life was kind of leading to what God had planned for him, and it seems like there's a similar story in your life as well. So 3 years in this church, as you mentioned, there's tension, right? You're trying to figure out, how do I be a lead pastor at 26 years old? This church is kind of dying and set in its ways. So what are some of the things you learned there that would prepare you for what God was calling you later?
I think the biggest lesson is to wherever, and going back to the story of Joseph, right? Wherever, and Brad said it too, wherever God puts you, flourish, right? Be faithful. I learned one very important lesson. And for those who are maybe thinking God's calling you to be in the ministry, is just be faithful where God puts you.
Bloom where you're planted.
Yeah, just be faithful. God will take care of the details. And God used a lot of older pastors to teach me that. Like, God has you there, Joe, in Sacramento. Now be faithful. Do what you do. If people don't want to change, if people don't want to do their thing, that's between them and God. Your call is just to be faithful, preach the gospel, love on people, and the rest, I'll take care of it. And yeah, that has stuck with me wherever I've gone, right?
The lesson's good for all of us to hear.
So, contentment, all that stuff, yeah.
That God is a benevolent God, right? Mm-hmm. We have to remember that when we're in our circumstances, as hard as they can be. Correct. So fast forward a little bit. A few years later, maybe even quite a few years later, you're a pastor. You're a pastor up in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I went back to the Bay Area in 2008.
Okay,
and the recession came, and I got laid off from a youth pastor job that I had, another youth pastor job, but that gave the opportunity to plant a church, and we planted Centro Familiar Cristiano, Christian Family Center, Southern Baptist Church. Grew in the garage of someone's house, But again, like going back, God has shown me His faithfulness, and I think He developed that character in me. I have this ability. My spiritual gift is faith. One of my spiritual gifts, and I've always been faithful to where God has put me. And even in 2008, when we got there, we started the church, we planted it, and we just watched the Lord grow. In 2015, we're still in the process of the church growing, and it was an African American church, which was our mother church. So it was a beautiful mixture of culture. It was African American was the mother church, and we were their mission, and we shared the building together. I learned a lot of things, but in 2015, the Lord said, it's time for you to move, and God just started putting stuff in my heart, and my wife didn't feel that we were comfortable there anymore. God makes you uncomfortable when it's time to move. And we didn't, for 8 years, we never complained. God's grace, but things started moving, and God said, I want you to move to Fresno. I have a cousin here in Fresno that invited me to a service at Clovis Hills, Southern Baptist Church, Clovis Hills, and he goes, well, come and look at the area. Maybe you can buy a house. So I'm never going to be able to buy a house. I don't have the money. He goes, don't worry. He goes, well, let's go. God made it such an amazing way that we were able to put some money down on our new construction that was being built on Southeast Fresno. Around the corner was a little church called The Well that had a Southeast campus.
Tiny church.
Yeah.
It's a very tiny
yes
church. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, here's my journey here to the Well, right? It's like, here I am coming from the Bay Area. God had put in my heart that if I left my church, was to come to Fresno to plant a church. I have this ability to me that God has put in me faith, and I love to plant things. So it's like, we're gonna go Southern Baptist. We're gonna plant a church in Ridley, and God closes the doors. He's like, no, and I'm still working in the Bay Area, commuting here. Oh wow. Yeah, and on the weekends coming over here, and so my wife hears about this a church called The Well that's right around the corner, literally like walking distance. And my wife finds out that they're in need of a campus pastor, and she tells me, why don't you send your resume? You're a pastor. They need someone that's bilingual. And in 2016, the Lord opened the door for me to be able to be the campus pastor there. And in the Well, I had a specific need of someone that was bilingual, culturally awareness. And they asked me if I could start a little Spanish group. They wanted it to reach and so in October of 2016, here I am. I got 10 packs of cookies that my wife and I made, and we made flyers, and we knew 10 Latinos that were my neighbors, and we're like, I'm going to invite them to church. I'm going to invite them to the Bible study, the Gospel of John. We're going to study. And out of the 10, one of them showed up. This young lady named Naomi that showed up, and I told her in that October, I told her, we're gonna grow as a church. She probably looked at me crazy. So we're gonna grow as a church, and it was just three of us: my wife, myself, and my neighbor. I said, we're gonna grow this church, and God's you'll see. So we started, being faithful to the Lord and doing Bible studies there, and they. And all of a sudden, the Lord started bringing people that they heard from the other gatherings here at the Well that there was a Spanish-speaking ministry, and people started coming to my house. And as I was working as a campus pastor in the English gathering, and then in the afternoons we would do the Spanish ministry, and the Well decided to close that campus for reasons. And but that was a blessing in the sky, because then that allowed me to
freed you up.
Yeah, freed me up, and it allowed me to move them. The group that was growing from 1, it grew to 10 to 12 to 14. I couldn't have all those people in my house, and so we decided to move to our fake campus in a small little room where the old children's wing was. Preschool area.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that during that season, and I remember you just being like, yeah, just people like coming out of the woodworks, like one person having a conversation with another person at the store or something, and be like, you should come with me. Like, we have a Spanish-speaking Bible study, and we're just like talking about God together. And I remember you being like, I'm not personally inviting all these people, but people are, it's happening.
Yeah, there was a need, a hunger at that time, and there still is. That people want to hear good news of the gospel, right?
Yeah,
so
in their own heart language.
In their own language.
Yeah.
And that translation, not that translation is not good, but always people want to hear it from the language of the heart.
I remember when I first got here, you and I went on a trip together. We went to Guatemala, and I remember we were sitting in Antigua, and we were at that church. We were worshiping at this Spanish-speaking church, and they were very much like culturally similar to the Well. So we were singing the same songs, but I didn't know the words. And for the first time in my life, I felt like what it would be like for someone to come to an English-speaking church who didn't speak English. And the ability to worship in your own heart language, the tongue that you grew up speaking, is such a powerful thing. And for the first time, I finally understood that, sitting in that church in Antigua, trying to sing songs in Spanish, songs that I've sung in English a ton. But it was just an amazing thing. So coming home from Guatemala, I had a new appreciation for what you are doing here in Fresno.
Correct. Yeah.
So now we have La Fuente, right? Yeah. So fast forward, we have a Spanish-speaking congregation inside the umbrella of the Well. What has that been like? You're ministering to a very culturally diverse congregation, speaking the same language, but within the larger banner of a culturally white church. How do you balance that tension? What are the things that are good or hard? I'm interested in that.
Yeah. It took us about 3 years to be able to get a gathering, like a full-on gathering. And so when we moved in there, we know that we were going to be we're going to be part of the teaching team of the Well. We were going to teach the same text that they're doing the English gathering. So those of you who maybe are wondering, do they teach the same stuff? Yes, I'm part of the teaching team on Tuesdays with you guys.
Yeah, you even said that piece was pretty unique for the Spanish-speaking community, that it was sort of verse by verse, preaching expositorily.
When it comes to the Latinos coming to church, they usually come from the Catholic background or apostolic background, or some sort of very well balanced theologically extreme sometimes, or bad theology that is taught. So I knew that we had an advantage to a lot of our Spanish ministers here in the Valley. As I started doing my homework, I noticed that there was no real good theologically well-balanced church. And I was like, wow, we got something here. Maybe we can educate people and teach them what the Word of God says, and teaching verse by verse, and has been a blessing, because it has opened the doors to people to find out what the Bible says, not what the pastor says. And a lot of them have been manipulated by, false prophets, false teachers that want their money. And when you don't have that theologically balanced, you get motivated by the what the prophet or the apostle saying or whatever.
Yeah, sort of like a celebrity type personality that can convince people of most things.
Yeah. So that was, so I know I wanted to have two things in a gathering. I wanted to have good sound balance theology, and I wanted to have good music, which was important for a Latino. Right? I mean, we like to worship, and we a lot of passion, right? A lot of energy. So we put a lot of time into those two things. So if you were to come to one of our gatherings, you will hear good preaching, passionately preaching, and good music that you can hear from outside that attracts kids, attracts people. It's just,
my son always tries to run in there. Yeah. And the old lady's like, no, you can't come. This blonde-headed kid, he's not supposed to be here.
Yeah, we have a lot of...
That sounds really fun.
He probably wants the good food, too, because I know La Fuente can bring the heat when it comes to cooking.
Well, especially if Joe's there.
Yeah.
Answer the question, I guess I kind of drifted you away. Like, what's it like working with a majority white congregation and, under that banner, but being a different cultural setting?
It could be challenging sometimes because, such a big church as that we have, that, the Spanish ministry sometimes can be seen like something in the back. Mm-hmm. And we have to constantly be fighting or just reminding people that we're here and we are a big part of who we are. We are a blessing to have a Spanish-speaking ministry in our church, I think it's a blessing. It speaks a lot to our community, that we care for the Latinos in this community. So some of the challenges is that some of the things that culturally, we try to maybe translate, or things sometimes they don't sound good, or they don't work well with a Anglo-speaking congregation. Might not be the same in the Spanish culture. Latinos are very family-oriented, very even the let's take the 65-minute gathering that we had. Yeah. I had people leave my church because they say 65 minutes is too short, because they want to have a church where they're going to sing a lot of songs, right? Worship, and they expect the pastor to preach for at least 50 minutes. And I tell them, I'm not going to preach for 50 minutes, but you're welcome to leave if you want and stay. But those little things, and then the food, am I right? Like mostly, if you go to La Fuente, you're going to see a lot of warm welcome, and usually you're going to have some food after the gathering, because that's where family happens, connections happen. We just had our Easter gathering, and I mean, I got there at 7 o'clock in the morning. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, people were still in the backyard of the FIG having, we had tacos, and we had games and stuff like that. But that's where church happens, community happens. So there's two things. There's one thing is called Latino time. That means that we are not in a hurry. We're going to take our time, and there's the Latino hospitality, where if you come, you're going to feel at home. You're going to get hugs. You're going to get, so those things, I think sometimes it's a challenge, right? Like here, because the gathering is so fast.
It's different.
It's different, right? And like, why do we have to finish this fast? Our children's ministry connects with the English gathering, so I tell them we have to finish around the same time, because the volunteers are there. So those are some of the frustrations.
Well, I remember even like this last teaching team we were in, there was like a moment where you had said like, hey, we're speaking to the sort of the employer-employee relationship in Timothy, and you had said like, this is actually a really hard thing for me to talk about, because there's a lot of people in my congregation who are in oppressive employee relationships, being that there's like, either they don't have proper documentation, or these people are taking advantage of them in their context. And I had never really honestly thought about that before. Kind of almost to my shame, I felt like in that moment I was realizing that there's this other congregation in our context that, we're speaking from our point of view on these sermons. And you said like, this was a hard one for me. And, the other gatherings were like, oh, home run, And so I even appreciate your voice is so valuable in that room. And I hope that like one of the things that we take away from this is like your story is valuable to anybody who hears it, because it paints a picture, sometimes immigration, or sometimes even just like what it looks like to be a Spanish church or something is like a thing that's out there. It's like an other, or, label it as whatever you want, but it's not personal. But we're sitting here with our brother in Christ, fellow pastor, who is an immigrant, who came from another country, who's built a congregation alongside us as pastors, who we love. And, your story is important. And in that room, I felt like you provided me an entire different perspective on something that I had just not even thought about. And so, anytime I get to sit with you or under your preaching or anything like that, and which I've done several times at our FIG campus, it's been really valuable. So, I don't know. We kind of have to wrap up our time here, but I just really want to thank you for. I feel like you have to oftentimes push and pull your own self more than we do, because we kind of are in the mainstream of our pastoral thought here. And so I'm just really thankful for your endurance and the ways that we've learned from you, but then also for like taking the time to even speak your word so that we can learn from you. And your experience really matters. Yeah,
I think seeing the scope of your life just is so glorifying to God, to see how he took a young boy in a really hard circumstance in Nicaragua and has led him to Fresno, California to pastor a Spanish-speaking church in a city that desperately needs a Spanish-speaking church that is solid theologically. So I know we appreciate what you're doing. We're so grateful for your faithfulness and just you obeying the Lord. And so thanks for doing what you do. Thanks for being here with us, Joe. It's been a privilege hearing your story.
Well, thank you guys for the invite. And for those of you who have Spanish-speaking friends, everybody knows a Latino, Juan, Maria, Felipe, whatever. Invite them to our gatherings at 11 o'clock in the language of heaven, which is Spanish. For those of you
at our Fig Garden
campus. And I'd say you'll get good preaching, good music, and if you're lucky, you'll get some good food. So,
all right. Well, thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you, brother.
Guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the WellCast. As always, don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends about us. For more information about the Well Community Church, visit thewellcommunity.org.